On the Commercial Law for Business course at Birkbeck College, University of London. In this session, I've separated the session into two parts. The first part aims to look at how laws are made and explains the purposes of laws. And we will also look at the differences between public and civil law. And remember that civil law can also be private law, right? So public and private law. So I'll just go through that again. By the end of the session, I really hope that you are able to explain how laws are made under the English legal system, explain the purposes of law, and explain the difference between public and civil law or public and private law. So our first question is, why is it stuck? Okay, our first question is, what is law? Now, laws are rules, but as we said in class today, they're more than just rules, right? There are rules everywhere. There are rules for how we talk. There are rules for in different families, what you can do, what you can eat, what time you go to bed. These are rules. I have my own rules for my daughter. You go to bed at a certain time. These rules, if they are broken, there are consequences, but the consequences cannot be enforced in court. Like, I can't take her down to the Crown Court and say, oh, she didn't go to bed at that time, so therefore she should be locked away. And I can't take her to the county court and sue her, right? Because these are not laws. If there were laws, then I would be able to have them enforced in court because they would be legally binding. So what we need to remember is that laws are rules, but they are rules made not by individuals, such as myself, but by the state, not by your mom, your sister, your uncle, but they're made by the state. And these rules made by the state have consequences that can be enforced in court. They are legally binding. And these rules or these laws fall under different categories, different areas, different divisions of law. And we're going to look at those much more in this session. But we do need to ask ourselves one question before we start. And that question is, what is the purpose behind having laws? I mean, why do we have them? We have them to uphold the rights of businesses. We have them to protect society. We have them to punish. We have them to uphold the rights of individuals. And we have them to maintain law and order. These are different reasons why we have laws within societies, why we have these rules that can be enforced in courts, why we have these rules that are legally binding, legally enforceable. And we have them there for various reasons, from upholding the rights of businesses to punishing, to maintaining law and order, protecting society, and to upholding the rights of individuals. And who makes them? Who makes these rules that are legally enforceable? Now, in most countries, the government is divided into three bodies. That's the legislature, the executive, and the judiciary. And usually it's the legislature who makes the laws in in most countries. Then you have your executive who enforces the law. And then you normally have the judiciary who interprets the law. Now, your legislature in most states is a state parliament. You see this in most countries, and they are the law-making body generally. The executive can have various bodies under them, but generally they do include the police, and they are responsible for enforcing laws. So you would have your legislature who says, okay, we're coming up with this new law, which would normally be the parliament in a country, and the new law says we all have to be home by 9 p.m. Who makes sure that we are home by 9 p.m.? Or who takes us down to the local jail if we're out after 9 p.m.? It's not the legislature, it's not the parliament. There's another body that is responsible for that, and that is the executive. They'll be involved in that part of the parcel. They'll be involved in enforcing the law, coming and knocking on a door. Have you been out after 9, right? And if you have, they might take you down to the jail. Now, when they take you down to the jail, you might start to say, you know what? I wasn't out after 9 p.m. In fact, you came and you picked me up. And when you came and saw me, you knew that I had been out at 8:55 p.m. So you are wrong, right? You are wrong, you enforcer of the law, right? And then you'll call up your solicitor, you'll start a case, right? And then your solicitor will take the case to court, and it is the judiciary who will be responsible for interpreting the law, for making it clear for us, because clearly the executive got something wrong, or maybe you didn't understand the law and maybe you're wrong, but the role of the judiciary is to interpret the law. So this is how we normally organize a state system. Now in the UK, who makes the laws? Is it the legislature? Does it fit into this nice, neat model that that other states have, or do other states even fit under this nice, neat model? Let's see. In the UK, our legislature is the Parliament and the Queen, right? And they do make laws. They make acts of Parliament, and these acts of Parliament can also be referred to or are known as statutes or legislation. And an example of an act of Parliament is, for example, the Human Rights Act. You'll have the name of the act or statute or legislation, whichever one you want to go for, and you'll have the word act at the bottom and at the end, and then you'll have the year that it passed through Parliament, the year it was signed off. And an example of that is the Human Rights Act 1998. In the UK, some laws, though, are also made by judges. So the system doesn't fit under that neat, orderly system that I mentioned before, right? Our so-called judiciary is also involved in lawmaking. And the laws that they make are case law or common law. And someone asked me in our class if these laws are binding, and they are binding. They're law. It's not any type of insignificant law. It's not just some judges saying some stuff. They are law, right? These are precedent. One example is Donahue and Stevenson. That's an example of a judge-made law, case law, common law, or judicial precedent. Yeah? Sometimes you'll see case law referred to as judicial precedent. That's another way we refer to it. And yes, this is another example of laws under the English legal system. And there are some others. We have delegated legislation, and delegated legislation are laws created by bodies with the power given to them by Parliament under what we call a Parent Act. So we'll study delegated legislation in much more detail later, but for now it's important to know that delegated legislation are pieces of law not made by judges, but made by different bodies, but these bodies only get the power to make that law because Parliament has given it that power. And that's why we say delegated, because Parliament has delegated that power to them, and Parliament does that through what we call a Parent Act. Now, our different types of laws are, we have public and we have private or civil law, as I mentioned at the beginning of the class. And it's important for us to begin to think about what areas of law would fit under public law, because you're going to see that we have so many different areas of law. And if you begin to think about what the focus or what the purpose of public and private law are, then we'll be able to more easily fit these areas of law under the branches. So if we look at public law, I would say public law is concerned with challenging or being challenged by the state, or maybe just challenging the state, right? And you'll see what I mean later on. And private law is concerned with disputes between individuals and companies, individuals and individuals, and companies and companies. This is private or civil law. So now our next thing is to try and fit the areas of law, the different areas of law, under either public or private. And let's do that together. No, our next task is to identify the areas of law. So the first area of law is administrative. The second is contract. The third is tort. The next is criminal. And I could even add company. It would be good because we're going to look at company in this course. Company law. Now, of all of these, where do you think they go? With looking at these, where do you think they go? Do you think they go under public or private? Let's have a look. So private law, you're looking at tort, contract, family. These are all areas of law that include disputes between individual and individual, or tort could be individual and business, contract could be individual and individual, or individual and business. Nowhere in there do you see anything to do with the state. It's not really about the state. That's not the primary focus with these areas of law, right? But if we look at public law, we have administrative, we have criminal, and we have constitutional, all involving dispute and the relationship between state and individual, right? Constitutional law, we're talking about what can the government do? What powers do they have over our freedom? What limits do they have with regard to how much freedom they take away from us? So it's the state and the individual. It's how the state interacts with the individual. The constitutional law also tells the government what procedures they need to follow when they're making laws. Constitutional law tells the different branches of government how they must interact with each other, and how they should regulate each other. This again concern the state. That's not family law. Family law is to do with generally husband and wife, mother and daughter, father and child. It's about usually about divorce cases. These are family private matters. So it's contract law. It's about you and a company. It's not the state, right? It's not. These are not things that are really concerning the state per se. Whereas you can see under public law, these are areas of law which really are focused on either challenging the state or telling us how the state can deal with us as individuals. Criminal law is another area of public law, because when we commit a crime, if we ever do, what we're really doing is we are violating the state as a whole, right? So you might commit a crime, and the crime might be, in your eyes, just a violation of a person, right? So you might hit somebody, you might, I don't know, kick them, and to you, you're just kicking that person, and so therefore you might be thinking, well, that's private. But it's not private, because in fact, once you've committed a crime, you're not just violating that person's physical body, but you are committing a crime against the state. So criminal law falls under public law. So here this area of law is concerned with you being challenged by the state. Now, our next focus is to look at the differences between what we call criminal and civil law, because there is this extra division in English law, and you need to be familiar with them, and you also need to be familiar with the different courts that deal with these different areas of law. So the three questions that I'm going to be looking at in this part of the lesson are: what is the purpose of each branch of law? And now I'm talking about, when I say each branch of law, I'm talking about criminal and civil. Like, what's the purpose of the criminal branch and what's the purpose of the civil branch? Then I'm asking, what are the consequences of breaching civil and criminal law? Are the consequences the same or are they different? And then I'm asking, which courts deal with the different types of law? So which courts deal with criminal and which courts deal with civil law? So criminal law is really, as I said, is a part of public law, right? And civil is separate. That's private law. The reason for this is that crime is regarded as a crime against the state and society. So you look at who starts these criminal cases. It might be that you do something to me and I go down to the local police station and I report it. But really, it's going to be the Crown Prosecution Service. It's really a violation of the state. So that's why when you look at the criminal cases, you'll often see something like R and Miller, as I have on the screen here, because the R represents the monarch. Remember, the monarch is the head of the state in a country. So really, it's like, okay, the state, the head of state, the monarch, the R, Regina, that's what it means. The R, the head of state, the monarch, versus you, Miller, who did what you shouldn't have done. You committed a crime, and we are challenging you because you have um, broken a rule which is contrary to the state and society. And if you want, you can go on and have a look at the Crown Prosecution Service to find out a little bit more about this, the Crown Prosecution Service, and how they help to deal with criminals and help to investigate crimes. You get a better understanding of how the system functions. But we won't be looking at criminal law at all. But for some of you, it could be interesting to get an insight into how this works. Now, what's the purpose of these divisions of law? Now, let's start with criminal law on the right-hand side. Criminal law is really to punish, to maintain law and order, and to protect society. That's our focus there. That's what we're all about. To punish, to maintain law, order, and to protect society. But if we look at civil law, private law, if someone breaches a contract, what are the consequences? You're not sent to prison, you know. You're not sent to prison. You may have to give back if it's money that you haven't given to the other party. You may need to give it back to them. If it's something that you haven't done, you haven't upheld your part of the bargain, you may need to get that done. So here with civil and private law, really our focus is upholding the rights of individuals. It's not really about punishing. And also our focus is to uphold the rights of businesses. If we remind ourselves of some of the areas of civil or private law, we know it's not only contract. We have tort, we have family law. Generally speaking, if, for example, you have a divorce case, okay, the people getting divorced may want to punish each other, but the court's concern in those cases is not really to punish any of the individuals involved in the case. The court's real focus is just to uphold the rights of the individuals. That's the court's focus. So you can see clearly that the civil/private law has a different purpose. Remember at the beginning of the class, we pointed out all the purposes of law. And now what we're doing is now we're separating them and we're putting the purposes under the different branches of law. Civil law is really concerned with disputes between individuals and businesses, disputes between individuals and individuals, and disputes between businesses and businesses. So individuals and businesses, if, for example, you take out a contract with T-Mobile and T-Mobile is supposed to give you a certain amount of data for a certain amount of money, and they haven't been doing it, and they've continued to do it for a long time. This is a civil dispute. It's between you and a business, right? And why are you going to the law? Because you want your right to get what you paid for to be upheld. That's why you're going to them, and that's how the courts may be able to help you. This civil law is also concerned with individual disputes between individuals and individuals. So again, you might be in a dispute with in family law. You want your rights to be upheld. It might be something to do with property and exchange of property, and you feel that you have the right to a particular property. You're not going to the court with you might hate the person, but you're not going to the court seriously thinking that the court is going to punish your ex-partner or send them in prison because they are in the property when you think that you should be in the property, right? You're going in there really because you think that you have a right to that property and you want the court to uphold that right. And your argument is that by upholding that right, they're going to give you that property. But you're not going in there saying, punish this person. At least not, you're not saying it out loud. Then disputes between businesses and businesses, we'll look at a lot in this course as we look at company law, right? And an example of a civil law case, which is here, Donahue and Stevenson, which I do need to talk to you about, because remember we looked at the criminal law case briefly, and I mentioned that R represents the state, right? You'll notice that with civil law cases, we don't have any R and Stevenson, R and Roberts. Those are criminal cases. And the reason being is that with civil cases, you have either an individual or a company challenging another individual or a company. So you have a name of a person versus a name of a person, or a name of a person versus a business, or a business name versus a business name. You won't see the R. And again, you have the year being the year of the decision. And important as well to note, because it came up briefly in class, is that when we're talking about civil law, which is going to be our main, the type of cases we look at in our court, in our case, we use the language claimant and defendant. So, for example, Donahue in this case is the claimant and Stevenson was the defendant. Okay. Now, I do need to explain or go into detail a little bit about the hierarchy of the courts, because understanding the hierarchy of the courts is very important for our understanding of how case law is made. Remember, we started off by talking about how laws are made in this country. And remember that some are made in Parliament, but some are also made in our courts. These are called case law, common law, or judicial precedent. And we need to really understand how the courts operate in this system in order to understand judicial precedent. Now, we'll go into that in a lot more detail later on in the course. But for now, it's important for you to understand the following. It's important for you to understand